Now we'll look at the causes of the March Revolution, March 1917 Revolution. So on this one will be the Communist Revolution in Russia. So the March Revolution, it was the beginning of the Communist Revolution that we are going to look at. Now, there were two revolutions. One was in March and the other one was in November. So we'll start looking at the March 1917 Russian Revolution. So this one, we are going to look at the causes. The causes, so there were a number of them that were there. So we'll start looking at these causes now. So the first one, it was the land grievances. The land grievances. As we pointed out that in 1905, there were land reforms. After there were those petitions, the revolutionaries, they went to the Winter Paris to submit their petitions, and there was the October Manifesto. There then, it resulted into the land reforms. So with that, it made improved the well-being of the peasants, as we already pointed out that during that class system, the most vulnerable, the most oppressed group was the peasants. So with that, then there was communal farming, and grain taxation was abolished. To say communal farming, they were just farming just for the community, that is the peasants. And grain taxation, that was in 1905, it was abolished. Then there was the redemption payments. So these ones were cancelled as well. So what were these redemption payments? The redemption payments, they were the annual payments to the government by the peasants for their freedom and land use. Mind you, we said that the peasants, they did not have the rights, they did not have the freedom. So to buy their freedom, they needed to pay what was called the redemption payments. So that one was abolished in 1905. So some peasants then, they were given loans to buy and own land. So they were able to buy and own land. Remember, we said that the peasants, they did not have the rights. Even the right to land, it was not for them. So after 1905, they were able to buy land. They were able to buy land. They were given loans. So there were those changes that were there by the Tsar's government. So with that, with the having of loans as well as the acquiring of land, then there was an emergence of a class of wealthy and comfortable peasants, and these were known as the kulaks. The kulaks were the rich peasants. So things changed there. And all these were done when Peter Stolypin was appointed as the prime minister. So he was appointed as prime minister of the Tsar. So it was somehow a change. So he was there between 1906 and 1911. So Peter Stolypin, however, his being was like, he was so harsh. He was so harsh to the revolutionaries. That is to say, he was more of the Tsar. Whatever the Tsar was doing, he was supporting that one, despite the changes or some of the changes to the people. So he did not like the revolutionaries. As such, some people who wanted to voice out, to give out their voices, they did not like him, and he was assassinated in 1911. So after his death, his reforms now were abandoned. The well-being of the peasants now was left out. So by May 1917, many peasants were still in heavy debts with no access to land. See that? Those things changed, whereby those loans were given to peasants. 1911, he died. That is Peter Stolypin, the Prime Minister, who somehow defended the peasants. But after his death, then all his changes were abandoned, and it left the peasants with heavy loans, the loans that they got. The second cause of the March 1917 revolution was the ineffective Duma. So after the October Manifesto, Russia expected a parliamentary democracy, a democracy where someone voices out or gives out his views, and others, they are able to reject that one, the views of someone. So with that, it was not there. It was not there uh, even after the first Duma. So the first Duma met in 1906. Then the Tsar sent home its representatives. They were sent home whenever he disliked its recommendations. When the parliament or the Duma met, maybe to agree on something, and when the Tsar did not like whatever they discussed, then he would say, all right, you have discussed now enough. All right, I will go. You go home. I will call you back to convene again. So that's what the Tsar did. So the first Duma was dissolved in 10 weeks. That is, within 10 weeks, then the Tsar said, all right, representatives of the Duma, now it has been abolished. We don't have any representative now. It was dissolved just like that. Then, also the Tsar, to ensure that there was no effective Duma, he deliberately changed the dates for elections. So whenever there were elections, he could change those dates to say, all right, we have changed the dates for elections because of reasons maybe beyond the government's control. And not only that, he could also change the elections law. The elections law were changed to say, all right, maybe when he saw someone, maybe he's younger, and he's contesting for maybe a member of parliament, to say maybe he's 46 years. Then he could say, all right, the laws now have changed. This time around, those who will be contesting, they should be 60 years and above. So laws were just changed in order to favor the Tsar. And again, he used the police. Terror and intimidation of voters. The police moving around the villages. Hey, you have to vote for this one and not this one, like that. And there was also disqualification of candidates. Candidates were disqualified anyhow, to say maybe they were campaigning in other areas, to say, all right, this one, he was doing a campaign in a restricted area, he is disqualified. And voters as well, they were also disqualified, some of them. So all those who seemed to oppose the Tsar, those ones, they were disqualified. Right? And again, the third Duma lasted longer. It only agreed to the Tsar's proposals. So that's the reason why the third Duma, it took some time to last, or it lasted longer to be dissolved. So the failure of the Duma removed people's hopes. So people's hopes of having their mouthpiece in the Tsar's government, it was removed, because the Duma now, it has been found now to be the tool of the Tsar. So there, the people's hopes were removed. Many rebels, therefore, many people, they protested the misuse of the Duma. and were either jailed, or those who protested, they were jailed, executed, or even exiled to Siberia. We talked about Siberia to say it was the labor camp. So all those who protested, they were executed, they were jailed, they were sent to, others were sent to Siberia. So those who accepted and announced the announced reforms by Tsar were referred to as the Octoberists. They were called the Octoberists. So the Octoberists were those who accepted the October Manifesto. Remember, we said the October Manifesto, where the Tsar announced some changes. So once order was restored, we are talking here of 1905. Once order was restored, then the Tsar abandoned most of the reforms. So most of the reforms were abandoned when when now there was peace in Russia. So apart from the ineffective Duma that caused the 1917 revolution, the March Revolution, there was also the influence of the Marxism. Remember Karl Marx with his ideas of the haves and the have-nots, so that the haves, they need to liberate themselves, they need to stage a revolution. So that was, or that one had a very big impact on the people, or influence. So many people and groups, they believed that the political and economic situation in Russia would improve only through socialist revolution. So they were buying the idea of Karl Marx, the Marxism. So the influence of Marxism also played a role in the 1917 March Revolution. The other cause was the industrial workers' problems. Remember, we mentioned also about the workers. Remember, in 1905, it was them, they were them, led by Father Gapon, who went to the Winter Palace in order to present their grievances on the working conditions. So the workers, they faced many problems due to rapid and unplanned industrialization. So industries were growing just rapidly and were not planned. As such, uh, uh, concern for the workers was not there. It was so minimal. So there was overcrowding in slums. Slums are places where people live, like we call the combon. Those combon, they are the slums. And unhygienic dwelling places also in there, they were not good. They are so unhygienic. We know some unhygienic places in towns like Lilongwe. There are some places we may not mention in Blantyre and Zuzu, or in most of the towns. There is a certain section where you can even see that this section is really unhygienic. So most of the workers were exposed in those areas. So, and sometimes wages were paid in kind. So here we are saying that they were not paid money. Sometimes they were paid like things. Maybe they were given food, bread, to say, all right, you have worked for 3 weeks or 2 weeks now. Your wages are here. Get this bag of flour, like that. So, and sometimes just a thank you to say, all right, you have done a very good job this time around. Next time we'll see what to do. And that was the wages. So wages were paid in kind. So the workers were not happy with that. And again, the government maintained low wages to attract foreign investors. So the government, it was saying the minimum wages for the workers is this, so that more investors come, so that they abuse more people there, more people work for less wages. So it was the plan of the government to maintain low wages so that they attract foreign investors to come, open the factories and abuse more people. And workers were subjected to long hours of work. So there were long hours of work, still more very minimal wages. And urban workers' unhappiness gradually grew, and they became highly and politically charged. So they became politically charged with whatever was happening, to say, what are we doing? What is our government doing? Exposing us to be abused by foreign investors. So the people were not happy with that. Then the other cause of the 1917 March revolution was the dissatisfaction with Grigory Rasputin. So the Russians were not happy with the influence of this gentleman. So Grigory Rasputin, he was an illiterate holy man. He was an illiterate man of God from Siberia. So he was brought to the royal family to heal their son Alexis, who suffered from hemophilia. So he was suffering from this disease, hemophilia, and they invited the man of God, Grigory Rasputin, from Siberia. But we are saying this man was illiterate. He didn't know how to read and write. So when he was exposed to the royal family there, he ended up dominating the Tsar's government. What did he do? He acted as an advisor and even influenced the appointment of ministers. He went there, you can see there, he went at the palace as a doctor. Now he has become an advisor of the Tsar to say, all right, you are choosing the ministers now, you have to choose that one, to choose that one. Maybe it was under the influence of, because he was taken to be a holy man. Say, God has told me that you need not to appoint that one, he's a bad minister. So he influenced the decisions of the Tsar. So people were not happy with him. And again, this Grigor Rasputin, his advice prevented the reforms. Remember the reforms by Peter Stolypin? He prevented them. So the people needed those reforms, such as on land ownership and to have the effective Duma. So he stopped them to say, no, 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 you do not have to do that. People, they need just to obey you. So most ministers were corrupt as a result. Those who were chosen under his advice were corrupt and inefficient. So the government therefore lost its popularity. The people did not like the government of the Tsar because of Rasputin. So people disliked Rasputin also because he was a drunkard man of God. He was so blasphemous. He did not have respect to the people. And again, he was harassing women, and he was also a womanizer. Remember, he was a man of God brought to the royal family. But he was doing all those things. So the royal family, on the other hand, did not criticize him. They did not criticize him. Why? Because of the healing that he did. So as a result, he was assassinated. Grigory Rasputin was assassinated in 1916. Yeah, so he was assassinated by the conservatives who were led by Prince Felix Yusupov. So Prince Felix Yusupov, led by the conservatives, they assassinated Grigory Rasputin in 1916 for whatever he was doing in Russia. The other cause of 1917 March Revolution was the impact of the First World War. So, as you may recall, Russia sustained greater casualties in the First World War, suffered a lot, most destruction, most soldiers died were of Russia. So some soldiers during this time, they even refused to fight, and many of them, because of what was happening in the battle there, they deserted. They ran away from the battle because of what was happening. And also what happened during that war, the Tsar made himself the army commander in 1915, and he went there to the battlefront he joined the soldiers in the battle. So whatever happened, whatever the casualties were suffered there, because he was the army commander, then he was responsible for the defeat. So the Tsar, he went to the battlefront, and the result was that Russia suffered a lot of casualties. So all of these, they were on him, the Tsar. And during this time, when he went to war, he left the government in the hands of the Tsarina, his wife, and who else? Rasputin. They were the ones running the government when the Tsar was at the battlefront. So you may just see Rasputin being in charge of the government. What can happen there? So things were not okay. So the situation got worse, and when the Germans destroyed the railways and invaded wheat regions like of Ukraine. So that's when the things now got worse, because the Ukraine region, it is where they were producing a lot of wheat there for bread. Then things were got out of hand in Russia. So it led to serious shortages of food and essential consumer goods because railways were destroyed. So the results were that prices now went up. The prices went up. And with that, millions of people, they came close to starvation. They starved. They starved because of that situation. Now let's look at the actual revolution of that March, the March 1917 revolution. So the revolution, it started on 8th March. So it began as women marched on St. Petersburg. They were demanding bread. Remember, we have just said that after the Germans now, they bombed the railways and they took over the region that produced wheat. It means now it resulted into shortage of bread. So the result was that prices went up. And on 8th March 1917, women now started to chant, "We want bread, we want bread." Then later on, or immediately, the workers, they joined them and chanting the anti-Tsar songs. So they were chanting to say the Tsar need to go out because he has failed. So soldiers fired at the demonstrators in order to subdue the event. So a command was given to say, no, these demonstrators, they need to be stopped. But what happened was that on 13th March, soldiers joined the rioters and they started seizing the government buildings and land. So you can see what happened. The soldiers on 8th March, they were against the demonstrators. But on 13th March, the soldiers, they joined the demonstrators and started getting the land. Then the Tsar lost support of the army. You see, when the president loses the support of the army, it is very dangerous. It is very dangerous. So the riots intensified and the Tsar and his family were held in custody by the soldiers. So these things happen sometimes. Then the Tsar abdicated. To abdicate is to leave the throne. He abdicated the throne. He left the throne. He left to be the Tsar on 15th March. So you can see there. And it was the end of the Romanov dynasty. So the end of the Romanov dynasty was when Tsar Nicholas II abdicated the throne on 15th March 1917. For how long did this revolution take? You can see to it only from 8 to 15, about 1 week. Then the country is not having the leader. So you can see the power of the revolution there. And here we are saying it started with women, then the workers joined, then the soldiers, then that was the end. Within 7 days, things were over, and the Romanov dynasty, it was the end of that. Now, after the Romanov dynasty went down, then it happened that there were the Bolsheviks that gained power. So let's look how these Bolsheviks gained power in Russia. How the Bolsheviks gained power in Russia. So after the abdication, after the Tsar left the throne, then few members of the Duma, they set up what was called the provisional government. So you can see there, the revolution just happened. Women were just chanting for bread. Workers were just chanting to say, we want change of our working condition. Soldiers, they stopped getting the orders. These people, they were not after maybe getting the throne of the Tsar. So after the Tsar left the throne, what it meant was that there was a vacancy there. Who was to be the leader? Then the Duma, members of the Duma, they were the ones who set up the provisional government. So this provisional government, it was led by Prince George Lvov. So Prince George Lvov was the one who led the provisional government. So the Soviets, remember, I said that we'll be mentioning this name Soviets for quite long in this world history. So the Soviets, those councils were revived to press for improved conditions. See? So there was that provisional government by the parliament led by the Prince George. So here the Soviets, those councils that were formed, then they came back, they revived to say we want improved conditions. So Soviets consisted of workers and soldiers this time. See, they were the people who staged that revolution. They were the people who were now to be respected because they are the ones who have made it possible for the Tsar to leave the throne. So the Soviets revived, and these Soviets, they were comprised of workers as well as the soldiers. So power was then shared between the provisional government and the Petrograd Soviet. See, so that's how the things changed in Russia. So this Petrograd Soviet controlled the army, railways, and factories. See, so power now was shared between the provisional government and the Soviet, the Petrograd Soviet. So this Petrograd Soviet, it was looking after the army, the railways, and the factories because there were so many workers there in the factories. So it was to look after their condition there. So majority of the Petrograd Soviet were the Marxists who wanted workers to take over power. So they wanted workers to take over power. So Alexander Kerensky, he replaced Prince George Lvov in July. We are talking in the same year, 1917. And Prince Lvov, he promised three things when he took over that leadership. He said, immediately, we are going to have the elections. He said, we are going to have the elections very soon and grant all the Russians to vote. Then, he also promised the people to move land to peasants and good pay for workers. And he also promised people a second attempt to defeat Germany during the World War I. So you can see to it that while this Petrograd wanted the Soviet to take over, then it was a danger to the provisional government. That's when Alexander Kerensky took over and promised the people so that they avoid that. Failures of the provisional government. So there were a number of factors that led to the failure of the provisional government. So the first one was that the government was slow in sharing power with the Petrograd. That is the Soviet, the Petrograd Soviet. So what happened was that the relationship between the provisional government and the Soviet, the relationship was poor. So the Petrograd Soviet had influence over the army. We talked about that. And it ordered the army not to obey the provisional government. Then what happened was that the provisional government lost support of the army. And second factor for the failure that led to the failure of the provisional government was that it delayed to conduct elections. Remember, Alexander Kerensky, he promised the immediate or the soon elections. So that one was not implemented very soon. So it delayed to conduct the elections, but it had the justification that the World War I was still going on. So it was impossible since Russia was also involved in the war. And the third factor that led to the failure of the provisional government was that it made the unpopular decision to continue with the war against Germany. That is the First World War. So this one, it angered many people as the results were so pathetic, because there were so many problems in Russia as well as in the war front. And the other factor for the failure of the provisional government in Russia was that there was growing economic disorder and hyperinflation. And this one, it led to the rise of prices of goods at the market, and many people were starving in Russia. So there you can see the economic condition in Russia, it was not good at all. And the other factor was that the government was very slow in solving land problems. Remember, the peasants, they were fighting for land, and they were not prepared to wait any longer because they wanted land. To them, land was number one.
Simutaya nthawi yanu kufunafuna maphunziro muzakhala wotumidwa moyo wanu wonse. Ngati simuphunzira anthu azingokutumani, ajala kalime, ajala kuchwe manyazi, ajala katende yanti, ndipo anthu ophunzira wandi wotumanso kwambiri. Ndiye ngati simuphunzira, skulu akuyikirani apa mukhala otumidwa.